The study smelled of old paper in October rain. Dr. Nathaniel Aldrich sat in the leather chair his wife had given him
I've
30 years
missed our
ago,
talks
back
like
when their
this.
future stretched
Me
ahead
too.
like an unwritten
It's good
book.
to see you.
Now the leather was cracked at the arms where his hands had worn it down. Now the future had collapsed into something measurable. 6 months, the oncologist had said. Maybe 8 if you're lucky. Nathaniel didn't feel lucky. On the desk before him lay a manuscript bound in cracked leather, its pages the color of old bone. Liber Sanitatis Aeterni, the Book of Eternal Health. A cruel joke of a title for what it actually contained. He'd borrowed it from Yale's restricted collection 3 weeks ago, called in every favor he had left, told them he was writing one final book before retirement. He hadn't told them about the cancer. The manuscript had been written by Magister Aldrich of Winchester in 1349 during the first wave of the Black Death. Not a relative despite the name. Nathaniel had checked. Just cosmic coincidence that he'd spent his last months reading the deathbed observations of a man who shared his surname across 7 centuries. Aldrich had been a physician, the medieval kind, the kind who believed in 4 humors and bleeding patients until they stopped complaining. The kind who documented every treatment with meticulous care, never quite understanding that he was writing a manual for how to kill people with confidence. Nathaniel turned a page carefully. The Latin was dense, crabbed, angry in places. Quella viginti anorum, febris alta, sanguinem misi quater, mortua est. Girl 20 years old, high fever. I bled her 4 times, she died. Puer decim anorum, tu sis cum sanguinem misiter, mortuus est. Boy 10 years old, coughing blood. I bled him 3 times, he died. Page after page, the same pattern. Fever, bleeding, death. Infection, bleeding, death. Cough, bleeding, death. And then 2/3 through the manuscript, something changed. Cur moriuntur omnes cur non melius fiunt. Why do they all die? Why do they not improve? Nathaniel sat back, his own question written in medieval Latin by a man who'd been dust for 675 years. Outside rain tapped against the window. The neighborhood was quiet. New Haven in autumn leaves turning the color of fire, students flooding back to campuses with their impossible youth and their absolute certainty that they had time. Nathaniel had thought he had time too. The diagnosis had come 4 months ago. Pancreatic cancer stage 4. The oncologist, a pleasant woman named Dr. Reeves who looked impossibly young, had shown him scans that meant nothing to him. Dark masses that apparently shouldn't be there. Numbers that apparently were very bad. We can try aggressive chemotherapy, she'd said. It won't cure it, but it might buy you some time. Might, time, words that meant everything and nothing. What kind of time, he'd asked. She'd shifted in her chair. Quality of life will be significantly impacted. Nausea, fatigue, neuropathy. You'll be quite sick. But we could potentially extend how long without treatment? 6 to 8 months. And with possibly 12 to 18, though the last 6 to 8 would be difficult. Nathaniel had gone home. He'd sat in the same chair. He'd thought about his wife. Catherine had died 5 years ago. Breast cancer caught early, treated aggressively. They'd done everything right. Every protocol, every recommendation. She'd endured surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, round after round. The oncologist had been confident. The survival rates were good. The science was sound. Catherine had died anyway, not from the cancer, from the treatment. The infections that came when her immune system collapsed. The blood clots from the port in her chest. The pneumonia that arrived in the final weeks when her body had nothing left to fight with. She'd spent her last 3 months in and out of hospitals, hooked to machines surrounded by beeping monitors that tracked her slow dissolution. I'm so tired, she'd whispered near the end. Nate, I'm so tired. He'd held her hand. It had felt like holding a bird, all bone and skin. Just a little longer, he'd said. The doctors say, the doctors. She'd smiled barely. The doctors are killing me, Nate. Very professionally, very scientifically, but killing me. She died 2 days later. Nathaniel had spent the funeral accepting condolences from well-meaning people who said she'd fought so hard, she'd been so brave. At least they'd tried everything. They had tried everything. That was the problem. He turned another page in Aldrich's manuscript. More deaths, more bleeding, more confidence that the next patient would respond better, that the treatment just needed to be more aggressive, more thorough, more certain. Si deterior fate plus sanguinis offere debimus. If the patient worsens, we must remove more blood. Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd heard that logic before. Different words. Same thinking. If the cancer progresses, we'll increase the dosage. Medieval medicine with modern chemicals. 700 years of progress, and they were still bleeding patients, just using different tools. His phone buzzed, a text from his grandson Marcus, 24 years old, second-year medical student at Columbia. Brilliant kid. Catherine's eyes. Nathaniel's skepticism. Grandpa, did you talk to Dr. Reeves about the clinical trial new immunotherapy showing promising results for pancreatic? Love you. Nathaniel stared at the message. Promising results. That phrase that meant, we think this might work, but we're not sure, so we need people desperate enough to volunteer. He set the phone down without answering. The rain had picked up. It hammered now against the window, turning the glass into a waterfall. The room darkened. Nathaniel didn't turn on a light. He thought about Catherine in her final days. The oncologist visiting, adjusting medications, ordering new tests, always moving, always doing, never stopping to consider whether doing nothing might be kinder. He thought about the nurses who'd looked away when he asked if there were other options. He thought about how no one had said the obvious thing: she's dying. Let her die in peace. They'd kept trying, kept treating, kept removing what little life she had left, believing they were removing what was killing her. Just like Aldrich. Just like every physician who'd ever confused intervention with healing. Nathaniel pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. He'd been making notes for 3 weeks now, ever since he'd started reading the manuscript. Patterns. Parallels. The more he read, the more he saw. Medieval bloodletting. Modern chemotherapy. Both removed what kept you alive. Both grew more aggressive when patients worsened. Both were administered by confident professionals who believed absolutely in their methods. Both killed more often than they saved. He started writing. Case Study 1: Bloodletting and the Logic of Removal. The next morning, Nathaniel woke to pain. It lived in his abdomen, now a constant companion, dull most days, sharp when it wanted attention. He'd learned to breathe through it, learned to wait for it to subside into something manageable. He took no medication, no opioids. He'd seen what those did. His brother David, 10 years younger, dead at 52, from an OxyContin addiction that started with a legitimate prescription after back surgery. 1 pill every 4 hours for pain, then 1 pill every 3 hours, then 2 pills, then pills plus alcohol. Then David cold in a bathtub with foam at his mouth and an empty bottle on the floor. The doctors had meant well. The prescription was standard. The dosage was appropriate. The outcome was statistically predictable and utterly preventable. Medieval physicians had prescribed mercury for skin diseases. It worked in a sense. The symptoms changed. The patients also went mad, lost their teeth, suffered nerve damage. But the original complaint improved. Success. Until you looked at the whole picture. Nathaniel made coffee, stood at the kitchen window watching October light filter through the maple tree Catherine had planted when they first moved in. The leaves were scarlet now, beautiful and dying. His laptop sat on the kitchen table. He opened it, started typing. Medieval physicians believed in the 4 humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Sickness meant imbalance. The cure was simple: remove the excess humor, usually blood, always blood. He paused, sipped coffee, continued. The logic was impeccable within its paradigm. Sick people appeared flushed, feverish, full of dangerous heat. Obviously too much blood. Remove it. Balance would return. Health would follow. His fingers moved across the keyboard. Outside, a squirrel ran along the fence. The logic was also completely wrong. Patients were flushed and feverish because they were fighting infection. Their bodies were responding appropriately to threat. Removing blood removed their ability to fight. The treatment attacked the defense mechanism, not the disease. He stopped typing, stared at the screen. Catherine had been flushed and feverish during chemotherapy. Her white blood cell count had plummeted. Predictably, that's what chemotherapy did. It killed fast-dividing cells. Cancer cells. Also hair cells, gut lining cells, bone marrow cells. The treatment had attacked her defenses. The doctors had known this would happen. They'd prescribed white blood cell stimulants, another drug to counteract the effects of the first drug. Medieval physicians had done the same thing. Bled patients then prescribed tonics to restore strength, removing with one hand, replacing with the other, never questioning the fundamental approach. Nathaniel closed the laptop. He needed to see the manuscript again. Yale's Sterling Memorial Library rose like a cathedral in the center of campus. Nathaniel had spent 40 years walking these halls, teaching, researching, writing books that 12 people read. Medical history wasn't popular, it wasn't profitable. But it was true, and truth mattered to Nathaniel even when no one else cared. The restricted collections room was in the basement. Cold, quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears. The librarian was new, young woman with purple streaks in her hair and a name tag that said Emma. "Dr. Aldridge," she said, "you're here early." Couldn't sleep. She nodded like she understood, though she was maybe 25 and had probably never spent a night unable to sleep from anything worse than exam anxiety. Same manuscript, same manuscript. She brought it to him in its archival box, handled it with gloves, set it on the foam cradle designed to protect 700-year-old spines. "You know," she said, "I looked it up after you checked it out last time. Magister Aldrich of Winchester. He was executed right, burned for heresy. What did he do?" Nathaniel opened the box carefully. "He told people to stop the bloodletting." Emma blinked. "That's it. That's it. And they killed him. Medical authority doesn't like being questioned. Didn't then, doesn't now." She left him alone with the manuscript. Nathaniel turned to the section he'd marked, two-thirds through, where Aldrich's confidence began to crack. "Viginti pacientes hoc mense, omnes sanguinem misi, octodecim mortui sunt. Duos super vixerunt sed debiles sunt. 20 patients this month. I bled all of them. 18 died. 2 survive but are weak. Incipiens dubitaro, quid si sanguinis missio ipsa causa mortis est. I am beginning to doubt. What if the bleeding itself is the cause of death?" Nathaniel felt his throat tighten, a medieval physician surrounded by death, finally asking the right question. 700 years before germ theory, before antibiotics, before anything resembling modern medicine. But asking the question anyway. What if we're wrong? The next page was difficult to read. Aldrich's handwriting had deteriorated. Frantic, angry. "Dixi alias medicis riserunt me, dixerunt me hereticum esse, sed video quod video, qui non sanguinem mittuntur vivunt saepius." I told the other physicians. They laughed at me. They said I was a heretic. But I see what I see. Those who are not bled survive more often. Nathaniel sat back. The pain in his abdomen flared. He breathed through it. Aldrich had seen the truth, had recognized that his treatment was killing patients faster than the disease, had tried to stop it, had been condemned for it. The medical establishment in 1349 couldn't admit they were wrong, couldn't face the possibility that centuries of accepted practice were based on flawed assumptions, couldn't tolerate a physician who questioned authority. So they'd burned him. Nathaniel thought about the oncologists who treated Catherine. Kind people, intelligent people, people who genuinely wanted to help, but people trapped inside a paradigm that said aggressive intervention was always better than watchful waiting, that doing something was always superior to doing nothing, that death from treatment complications was somehow more acceptable than death from disease progression. They'd never questioned the protocol, never asked if less might be more, never considered that Catherine's body, given rest and support, might handle the cancer better than it handled the chemotherapy. They'd killed her with confidence, just like Aldrich had killed his patients. The difference was, Aldrich had figured it out. Nathaniel spent 6 hours with the manuscript that day, took photographs of key pages, made transcriptions, built a timeline of Aldrich's growing doubt and the medical community's growing hostility. By the time he left the library, the sun was setting. Campus was busy with students, young people laughing, carrying coffee, arguing about classes, all of them immortal in their own minds, none of them thinking about the fact that their bodies were slowly breaking down from the moment they were born. Nathaniel envied them, not their youth, their ignorance. He walked slowly back to his house. The pain had settled into a steady ache, manageable. He'd learned to measure his life in levels of pain. 1 to 3 he could work, 4 to 6 he needed to rest, 7 and above he needed to reconsider his choices. Today was a 5. At home he made soup, Campbell's chicken noodle. Catherine used to make soup from scratch. He'd never learned, hadn't seemed important when she was alive to do it. He ate at the kitchen table with Aldrich's notes spread out before him. Case study 1 was taking shape. Medieval physicians bled patients based on the theory of humoral imbalance. The sicker the patient, the more aggressive the bleeding. When patients died, the conclusion was always that they'd been bled too late or not enough. Never that the bleeding itself was the problem. Modern oncologists use chemotherapy based on the theory that killing fast-dividing cells would eliminate cancer. The more advanced the cancer, the more aggressive the chemo. When patients died, the conclusion was always that they'd started treatment too late or the dosage wasn't sufficient. Never that the chemotherapy itself was killing them. Different eras, different tools, same fundamental flaw. mistaking intervention for healing, mistaking activity for progress, mistaking confidence for correctness. Nathaniel pushed the soup away half-finished. His appetite had been gone for weeks. Food tasted like obligation. He opened his laptop, started writing properly now. Not notes. Prose. Catherine died on a Tuesday in March. The daffodils were blooming outside her hospital window. She'd always loved daffodils, planted them every fall, never got to see these ones bloom. His fingers paused over the keyboard. The oncologist came in around noon, checked her chart, adjusted the morphine drip, said something about how her body was shutting down, how we were keeping her comfortable, how this was the natural progression. He kept typing. Natural, that word, as if there was anything natural about dying hooked to 6 different machines in a room that smelled like antiseptic. As if there was anything natural about spending your last days too drugged to speak, too weak to move, too destroyed by treatment to recognize the people you loved. The words came faster now. She'd started treatment 8 months earlier. Stage 2 breast cancer. Caught early. Good prognosis. The oncologist had been optimistic. Surgery first. Clean margins. Then radiation, then chemotherapy just to be safe. Just to make sure we got every cell. Nathaniel stopped, closed his eyes. We got every cell. We also got Catherine. He wrote through the night. The pain climbed from 5 to 6 to 7, but he ignored it. Took ibuprofen. Kept typing. By 3 in the morning, he had 15 pages. The story of Catherine's treatment, the parallel to medieval bloodletting, the identical logic, the identical confidence, the identical refusal to question. At 4, he started on case study 2, medieval dietary restrictions during plague. The fear of moist foods, fruits, vegetables, anything fresh. The belief that these foods corrupted the humors made the body susceptible to disease. The recommendations to eat dry foods instead. Stale bread, old meat, wine. Nathaniel had studied this extensively. During the worst plague years, people starved while food was available. They avoided fresh produce because doctors told them it was dangerous. They followed expert advice. They died from malnutrition while apples rotted on trees. He thought about his colleague Robert Mitchell, professor of biochemistry. Brilliant man, diagnosed with colon cancer 3 years ago. Robert had refused standard treatment, had gone the alternative route instead. Organic everything, alkaline diet, juice cleanses, coffee enemas. A whole ecosystem of practitioners who promised that the right foods would cure cancer, that mainstream medicine was poisoning people, that nature had all the answers. Robert had lost 40 pounds in 6 months. His cancer had spread. By the time he'd finally agreed to chemotherapy, it was too late. He'd died malnourished, weakened his body, too depleted to handle treatment or disease. Different restrictions, same result. Medieval physicians banning the foods that might have helped. Modern alternative practitioners banning the treatments that might have worked. Both operating from the same place, absolute certainty in their paradigm. Both convinced they were saving lives. Both wrong. Nathaniel wrote it all down. Robert's slow decline, the juice cleanses that left him lightheaded, the extreme diets that stripped his body of what it needed. The practitioners who kept adjusting the protocol, kept finding new things to eliminate, kept promising that healing was just around the corner, if he could be pure enough, disciplined enough, faithful enough. Magic thinking with a veneer of science. No different from medieval humoral theory. No different from bloodletting logic. Just different tools for the same fundamental error, believing that healing required removing something, whether blood or food or toxins or modern medicine itself. At dawn, Nathaniel stopped typing. His hands ached. The pain in his abdomen had climbed to 8. He took more ibuprofen, knew it wouldn't touch it, didn't care. He had 30 pages now. 2 case studies, 2 parallels, 2 examples of how humans repeated the same mistakes across centuries, confident each time that they'd finally figured it out. Outside, the sky was turning pink. Birds were starting their morning arguments. The maple tree stood black against the brightening sky. Nathaniel saved the document, closed the laptop. He thought about calling Marcus, explaining why he wasn't doing the clinical trial, why he wasn't fighting. But what would he say that he'd learned from a medieval manuscript? That sometimes the fight itself was what killed you. That Catherine's death had taught him that aggressive treatment could be aggressive dying. That he'd rather have 6 months of relative peace than 12 months of absolute hell. Marcus wouldn't understand. He was young. He still believed in fighting. Still believed that medicine was about winning or losing rather than about choosing how to spend the time you had. The phone rang. Nathaniel stared at it, recognized the number. Dr. Reeves. He let it ring. 4 times. 5. It went to voicemail. A minute later, the notification appeared. He played it. Dr. Aldridge, this is Jennifer Reeves. I wanted to follow up on our last conversation about treatment options. I understand this is difficult, but time is a factor here. The clinical trial I mentioned has limited spots. If you're interested, I need to know soon. Please call me back. Nathaniel deleted the message. Time was a factor. That part was true. But the question wasn't whether he had time. The question was how he wanted to use it. Fighting hooked to IV bags, vomiting exhausted, praying for a few extra months that would be spent in waiting rooms and hospital beds, or working, writing, finishing this book that no one asked for and maybe 12 people would read. The choice seemed obvious. He went to the kitchen, made more coffee, stood at the window watching the morning light spread across Catherine's maple tree. His phone buzzed. Text from Marcus. Grandpa, Dr. Reeves called me. Said you're not returning her messages. What's going on? Please talk to me. Nathaniel typed slowly. I'm fine, working on a book. We'll call you soon. Love you. It wasn't entirely a lie. He was working on a book. He would call. Soon was relative. He sent the message, set the phone aside, went back to the study. Aldrich's manuscript waited on the desk where he'd left it yesterday. He'd brought it home against protocol, signed it out properly, but knowing he wouldn't return it on time. Maybe wouldn't return it at all. Emma, the librarian, would probably get in trouble. He felt bad about that, not bad enough to stop. He opened to the next section he'd marked. Aldrich writing about water. Omnes bibunt ex eodum flumine. Supra oppidum latrina in aquam fluit. Infra oppidum haurimus aquam ad bibendum. Nemo videt problema. Everyone drinks from the same river. Above the town, the latrine flows into the water. Below the town, we draw water for drinking. No one sees the problem. Nathaniel had to laugh. Bitter short. No one sees the problem. Medieval cities built on rivers, using them for everything. Waste disposal, drinking water, laundry, brewing beer. The same water flowing downstream carrying disease from one household to the next. The logic was simple. Water is water. It flows. It's clean. Look at it. Clear. No smell. Obviously safe. The reality was invisible. Bacteria, parasites, disease vectors that wouldn't be discovered for another 500 years. Medieval people died from their own waste, drank it, washed in it, fed it to their children, never connected the water to the sickness because they couldn't see the connection, because authorities said water was safe, because that's how it had always been done. Nathaniel thought about Flint, Michigan. He'd consulted on that case 4 years ago. A lawyer had hired him to provide historical context for the lawsuit, how governments had failed to protect water supplies throughout history, how authority figures had denied problems even when evidence mounted, how people in power always prioritize cost over safety. Flint had switched water sources to save money. The new water was corrosive. It leached lead from old pipes. Children drank it, developed learning disabilities, behavior problems, irreversible brain damage. Officials had known, had testing that showed dangerous lead levels, had denied it anyway, said the water was safe, said protesters were exaggerating, said everything was under control. Just like medieval authorities had said the water was fine. Just trust us. We're the experts. Nathaniel had met some of those Flint families, parents who'd given their children water trusting it was safe, watching them change, become different, lose potential. All because someone in power had decided that money mattered more than health. Different century, different poison, same betrayal. He started writing case study 3. By noon, he had 50 pages. 3 case studies complete. Medieval bloodletting mirrored by modern chemotherapy. Medieval dietary restrictions mirrored by alternative medicine extremism. Medieval water contamination mirrored by Flint and 1,000 other environmental poisonings. The pattern was clear. Humans trusted authority. Authority was often wrong. People died. The system learned nothing. 700 years later, different names, same mistakes. Nathaniel's hands were shaking now. The pain had reached 9. He needed to stop, needed to rest, needed to take something stronger than ibuprofen. He wouldn't. He had one more case study for part 1. The big one. The parallel that had started this whole project. The cats. He turned to Aldrich's notes about the cat massacre. Pages and pages of anguish. Dicunt feles esse malae. Dicunt feles portare pestem. Interficiunt omnes feles. Sed post interfectionem plus muris vidae. Et plus pestis. They say cats are evil. They say cats carry plague. They kill all the cats. But after the killing, I see more rats and more plague. Aldrich had seen it, had watched his community destroy the one thing protecting them from rats, had watched the rat population explode, had watched the plague spread faster, had tried to tell people to stop. No one had listened. Cats were suspicious, nocturnal, independent, associated with witchcraft and women who lived alone and anything that didn't fit into proper Christian society. So they killed them, burned them, drowned them, eliminated them in public spectacles meant to cleanse the community of evil. The rats had thrived, the fleas had multiplied, the plague had accelerated. Cause and effect, obvious in hindsight, invisible in the moment. Nathaniel thought about antibiotics. He'd written about this before. Published papers that maybe 30 people had read about how modern medicine was repeating the cat massacre. Different target, same logic. Antibiotics killed bacteria. That was the point. Kill the infection. Save the patient. The logic was impeccable. The logic was also incomplete because antibiotics didn't just kill bad bacteria. They killed everything. The gut microbiome, the bacteria that help digest food, produce vitamins, regulate immune function. The bacteria that had co-evolved with humans for millions of years. The bacteria that were in a very real sense part of being human. Kill them all, sterilize the gut, create a vacuum. And into that vacuum came resistant bacteria. C. difficile, MRSA. Organisms that thrived in the absence of competition. Superbugs that killed patients who'd survived the original infection. Nathaniel's grandson, Marcus, age 3, ear infection, standard antibiotic prescription. Amoxicillin, knocked out the infection, also knocked out his gut bacteria. 2 weeks later, explosive diarrhea, fever, emergency room, C. diff infection. Nearly died, 3 years old. Almost killed by the treatment for a minor infection. Because the antibiotics had eliminated his natural defenses. Because medicine had learned to kill bacteria, but not how to distinguish between allies and enemies. Medieval people killing cats. Modern medicine killing gut bacteria. Both eliminating protection while trying to eliminate threat. Both confused about which was which. Nathaniel wrote it all. Marcus in the emergency room. The infectious disease specialist explaining that C. diff was common after antibiotics. That it was a known risk. That they'd treat it with different antibiotics. Stronger ones. To kill the bacteria that had flourished because they'd killed the bacteria that kept it in check. Antibiotics to fix the damage from antibiotics. Just like medieval physicians prescribing tonics to restore strength after bloodletting. The cycle continued. The pattern repeated. The lesson remained unlearned. By the time Nathaniel finished case study 4, the sun was setting again. He'd written for nearly 24 hours straight, 70 pages. Part 1 complete. The 4 medieval mistakes. The 4 modern parallels. The fundamental pattern underlying all of them, humans solving problems by destroying the thing that was actually protecting them, confident they knew better than nature, than evolution, than millions of years of adaptation. Bloodletting destroyed immune response. Dietary restrictions destroyed nutrition. Water contamination destroyed public health. Cat massacre destroyed pest control. Antibiotic overuse destroyed beneficial bacteria. Different tools. Same hubris. Same result. Nathaniel saved the document. His vision was blurring. The pain had exceeded his scale. 11 maybe? 12. He shuffled to the bathroom. Opened the medicine cabinet. The bottle of OxyContin sat there. Dr. Reeves had prescribed it, just in case she'd said. For when over-the-counter doesn't cut it anymore. He picked up the bottle, stared at it, his brother's face. Blue, foam, empty bottle. He put it back, went to bed instead. Lay in the dark. Breathed through the pain. Thought about Catherine, about David, about his mother, about Marcus at 3 years old, barely conscious from dehydration, saved by luck more than medicine. Thought about Magister Aldrich, burned alive for telling the truth. Thought about his own book. 70 pages that probably no one would read. Observations that probably no one would heed. Patterns that would probably repeat regardless. But he was writing it anyway. Because Aldrich had tried, had documented, had borne witness, had said, I see what I see. This is wrong. Someone needs to know. Nathaniel was doing the same. Not because it would change anything, because it needed to be said. The pain slowly receded, not gone, never gone, but down to manageable. 8, 7, he slept. Dreamed of Catherine. Healthy, young, planting daffodils, laughing, woke to October light and the knowledge that he had 5 months left. Maybe 6. Enough time to finish the book. Enough time to say what needed saying, enough time to hold up the mirror and show people what they were doing, what they'd always done, what they'd probably keep doing. But at least they couldn't say no one told them. At least there would be a record. Nathaniel got up, made coffee, sat at his desk, opened to a fresh page on the legal pad, wrote Part 2, the documentation. Outside, the maple tree burned red in morning light. The leaves would fall soon. Winter would come. The tree would look dead but wouldn't be, would sleep through the cold, would bloom again in spring. Nathaniel wouldn't see that spring, but the book would be finished. The mirror would be polished. The reflection would be clear. Whether anyone chose to look was beyond his control. He'd learned that from 700 years of history. People rarely looked, but someone had to hold up the mirror anyway. He started writing. 3 weeks passed. Nathaniel measured them not in days, but in pain levels and pages written. The pain climbed steadily. 8 became the new baseline 9, the frequent visitors 10, the unwelcome guest who stayed too long. The pages accumulated with the same inexorable progression. 70 became 90, became 115. The phone calls continued. Dr. Reeves, Marcus, the department. Nathaniel had learned to let them ring, had learned that silence was easier than explanation, that not answering was kinder than saying what he really thought. But Marcus was persistent. The doorbell rang on a Wednesday morning. Nathaniel was deep in Aldrich's manuscript, reading about the flagellants, the processions of men who'd marched from town to town during the Black Death, whipping themselves bloody, believing their suffering would convince God to end the plague. The doorbell rang again, then knocking, then Marcus's voice. "Grandpa, I know you're in there. I can see the light. Please, just talk to me." Nathaniel sat very still. The house was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock and his own breathing. "Grandpa, Dr. Reeves called me. She said the clinical trial's still open, but you need to decide now, today. She said," Marcus's voice cracked. "She said you're running out of time. Running out of time." The phrase everyone used when they meant dying, as if time was something you could run out of like milk or coffee or patience, as if getting more time was always worth the cost. "I'm not leaving," Marcus said. "I took the train down from New York. I don't have class until Monday. I'll sit here all weekend if I have to." Nathaniel closed the manuscript, carefully, walked to the door, opened it. Marcus looked terrible, unshaven, red-eyed, still wearing scrubs under his jacket. He'd probably come straight from the hospital where he was doing his clinical rotation. "You look like hell," Nathaniel said. Marcus laughed, short, sharp, almost crying. "You look worse." It was probably true. Nathaniel hadn't looked in a mirror in days, hadn't showered in longer, was living on coffee and soup and the occasional piece of toast. His clothes hung loose, his skin felt thin. "Come in," Nathaniel said. They sat in the kitchen. Nathaniel made tea because Marcus looked like he needed something warm, and Nathaniel didn't have the energy to make anything more complicated. "Why won't you do the trial?" Marcus asked. "Not aggressive, just tired, defeated." "Dr. Reeves said the early results are promising. Immunotherapy. It's different from chemo. It teaches your immune system to fight the cancer. Fewer side effects. Better outcomes." Nathaniel set a mug in front of his grandson. "Do you know what the flagellants were?" Marcus blinked. "What medieval processions during the Black Death. Groups of men who believed the plague was divine punishment. They walked from town to town whipping themselves, sometimes with chains, sometimes with leather straps studded with metal. They bled, they suffered. They believed their pain would appease God." "Grandpa." "The logic was perfect within their paradigm," Nathaniel continued. "God sends plague as punishment for sin. Suffering demonstrates repentance. Therefore, voluntary suffering that should end the punishment. Simple, elegant, completely wrong." He sipped his tea. It burned his tongue. He didn't care. The flagellants didn't end the plague. They spread it. They gathered crowds, traveled between cities, brought disease with them. Every town they visited trying to cure the plague became a new outbreak center. They did exactly the opposite of what they intended. But they were so certain, so committed, so convinced that suffering was the path to salvation. Marcus stared at him. "Are you comparing medical treatment to medieval flagellation?" "I'm comparing the logic. Suffering equals healing. More suffering equals more healing. If it's not working, you're not suffering enough." "That's not—" Marcus stopped. "Start it again. Immunotherapy isn't about suffering. It's about activating your body's natural defenses. And the side effects." Marcus was quiet for a moment. There are side effects, fatigue sometimes, immune reactions, but compared to traditional chemo, compared to nothing, the question hung in the air between them. You're giving up, Marcus said quietly. That's what this is. You're just giving up. Nathaniel shook his head. I'm choosing. There's a difference. Choosing to die. Choosing how to spend the time I have left. There's a difference there too. Marcus put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. Nathaniel wanted to comfort him, wanted to say something reassuring, couldn't think of anything that would be both comforting and true. Your grandmother, Nathaniel said finally. Did I ever tell you what she said at the end? Marcus looked up, shook his head. She said the doctors were killing her, very professionally, very scientifically. But killing her. Nathaniel paused. She was right. The cancer would have killed her eventually, but the treatment killed her faster. And it killed her worse. She spent her last 3 months in hospitals, in pain, confused from the medications, too weak to walk, too nauseous to eat. That wasn't dying from cancer. That was dying from trying not to die from cancer. But you don't know. I know enough. I know the clinical trial is experimental. I know promising early results means we don't actually know if it works. I know there will be hospital visits, monitoring, tests, adjustments when the first approach doesn't work. More suffering dressed up as hope. Nathaniel leaned forward. I know I have maybe 5 months left, and I'm spending them finishing a book, not sitting in waiting rooms, not hooked to IV bags, not hoping for a few extra weeks purchased at the cost of the weeks I have now. Marcus was crying openly now. Nathaniel reached across the table, took his grandson's hand. It was warm, alive, young. I love you, Nathaniel said. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because I've studied 700 years of medical history, and I've learned one thing very clearly. Sometimes the treatment is worse than the disease. Sometimes fighting is just a slower way to lose. Sometimes the brave thing isn't to keep going, it's to stop. They sat there for a long time. The afternoon light shifted. The shadows lengthened. Finally, Marcus wiped his eyes. What's the book about? Nathaniel almost smiled. Medieval mistakes in modern mirrors. Can I read it? When it's done. Marcus nodded, stood, hugged Nathaniel carefully like he might break. Maybe he might. I should get back to the city, Marcus said. I have rounds tomorrow. Be a good doctor, Nathaniel said. Question things. Don't just follow protocol because it's protocol. Remember that every patient is a person, not a problem to solve. Like you're a person, not a problem to solve. Exactly like that. After Marcus left, Nathaniel sat alone for a while, thought about what he'd said, about Catherine, about choosing, about the difference between giving up and letting go. He'd been honest with Marcus. That was important, even if it hurt, especially because it hurt. Truth was the only thing Nathaniel had left to give. He picked up his phone, typed a message to Marcus. Thank you for coming. I know this is hard, but I need you to understand this isn't giving up. This is choosing dignity. I love you, always. He sent it, then turned the phone off. Completely this time, not just ignoring calls, off. The work was waiting. He returned to the manuscript, found the section about flagellants, read it again with fresh eyes. Aldrich had documented their arrival in Winchester, June 1349. 40 men stripped to the waist, blood running down their backs. They'd marched through the streets, singing hymns calling for repentance. A crowd had gathered. The sick had come out of their houses, everyone pressing close to witness the spectacle. 2 weeks later, the outbreak in Winchester had tripled. Flagellantes pestilentiam non curant, ferunt eam. The flagellants do not cure the plague. They carry it. Aldrich had tried to tell the church authorities, had been ignored. The flagellants had good intentions. They were suffering for God. Surely God would honor their sacrifice. God, being indifferent to human intentions and responsive only to microbiology, did not honor anything. The plague spread. The flagellants moved on to the next town. The pattern repeated. Nathaniel started writing Case Study 5. He worked through the evening, through the night. The words came easier now. He'd found his rhythm, his voice. The parallel was clear. Medieval flagellants believed suffering was holy, believed pain proved devotion, believed the more they bled, the more God would listen. Modern medicine operated on similar logic. Not religious, but no less faithful. The more aggressive the treatment, the better. The more you suffered, the harder you fought. Side effects were proof that the treatment was working. Pain was the price of hope. Nathaniel had seen it. Research he'd done 5 years ago for a bioethics board. A hospital in Boston was running trials on an experimental treatment for advanced pancreatic cancer. The treatment was brutal. The patients spent weeks in intensive care. The survival rate was 8%. 8% survived. The other 92% died faster and harder than they would have with hospice care alone. But that 8%, those were the success stories. Those were the ones who made it worth it. Never mind the 92 who suffered without benefit. Never mind that most of those 8 survived only a few additional months. Never mind the cost in pain, dignity, and resources. 8%. Better than nothing. Better than giving up. Better than accepting defeat. Nathaniel had interviewed some of those patients. The ones who'd survived, asked them if it was worth it. One man, Richard Hale, age 59, 2 months post-treatment, still weak, still in pain, had looked at Nathaniel with hollow eyes. "I thought it would be worth it," Richard said. "I thought if I could just survive, if I could just beat it, everything would be fine. But I'm not fine. I'm alive, but I'm not fine. I can't work, can't sleep, can't eat most foods, spend half my time managing side effects from the treatment, and the cancer's coming back anyway. The doctors say probably 3 to 6 months before we need to try something else." "Would you do it again?" Nathaniel had asked. "Knowing what you know now," Richard had been quiet for a long time. "Then I don't know. Everyone expects you to fight, to try everything, to never give up. How do you tell people you're tired that maybe you'd rather just stop?" You didn't, apparently. Richard had done another round of experimental treatment, had died 4 months later, in the hospital, alone because of COVID restrictions. His last weeks spent bleeding internally from a perforated bowel, a complication of the treatment, fighting to the very end, because that's what you did. That's what brave people did. Nathaniel wrote it all. Richard's hollow eyes, the 8% survival rate trumpeted as success, the 92% who suffered and died anyway. The logic that said suffering was evidence of trying, and trying was always virtuous regardless of outcome. The flagellants had believed the same thing. Suffering demonstrated commitment. Pain proved devotion. The fact that it didn't work only meant you needed to suffer more, try harder, bleed longer. 700 years. Different words, same mistake. By dawn, Nathaniel had 20 more pages. Case study 5 complete. He was running on coffee and soberness. The pain was at 10. His hands shook. He needed to stop. He didn't stop. Case study 6 was waiting. Urban overcrowding. Aldrich had written extensively about Winchester as a city. The narrow streets, the tightly packed houses, the way disease spread from one building to the next like fire. He documented how the plague had moved through neighborhoods. One house infected, then the one next door, then the whole street, then the whole quarter. Domus nimis propinque, hominis nimis multi in parvo spatio, pestis transit de domo in domum sicut ventus. Houses too close, too many people in small space. Plague passes from house to house like wind. Medieval cities had been perfect incubators for disease, built for defense against human enemies. Dense, walled, designed to pack as many people as possible into the smallest defensible space. No one had thought about the enemy that came from within, the enemy that thrived on proximity. Nathaniel thought about his mother, Dorothy Aldridge, age 89 when she died, sharp until the end, living in an assisted living facility in Hartford. A nice place. Expensive, well-maintained, everything a family could want for their aging parent. Until COVID. March 2020. The facility had gone into lockdown. No visitors, residents confined to their rooms, meals delivered, activities canceled. Everything designed to keep the virus out. It had gotten in anyway, spread through the staff, through the shared ventilation systems, through the dining halls before they closed them, through door handles and elevator buttons, and all the surfaces that connected one person to the next in a building designed for efficiency, not isolation. Nathaniel's mother had called him in late March, her voice small on the phone. Confused? She never sounded confused. "Nate, I don't feel well. They won't let me leave my room. They won't tell me what's happening. I can hear people coughing. Someone was crying last night. I'm scared." "I'll come get you," Nathaniel had said. "They won't let anyone in. I'll figure something out." But there was nothing to figure out. The facility was locked down. The residents were trapped. The staff was overwhelmed. The disease spread anyway, indifferent to protocols and good intentions. His mother had tested positive 2 days later, been isolated, given oxygen, monitored, deteriorated rapidly the way old lungs did when faced with a respiratory virus that turned them into inflamed, useless tissue. Nathaniel had tried to visit, Been turned away, called every day, spoke to nurses who sounded exhausted, spoke to doctors who sounded defeated, never spoke to his mother again. She'd been too weak, too confused. On a ventilator at the end, she died alone, in a room designed to keep her safe, in a building designed to keep everyone safe, surrounded by people dying the same way for the same reason in the same kind of rooms. Urban density, medieval or modern, same vulnerability, same outcome. Nathaniel wrote it all. The assisted living facility, the locked doors, the clustered rooms, the shared systems, the way efficiency created vulnerability. The way trying to protect everyone had trapped them in a building where the virus could spread unimpeded once it breached the walls. His mother, small and scared and alone, unable to leave, unable to be visited, dying in isolation while connected to hundreds of others through the very infrastructure meant to house her safely. Medieval cities built for defense against armies. Modern care facilities built for efficiency and profit, both concentrating vulnerable people, both creating perfect conditions for disease. Different architecture. Same mistake. He finished case study 6 as the sun reached its zenith. Wednesday, he thought, or maybe Thursday, the days had started blurring together. Case study 7, scapegoating. This was the one Nathaniel had been avoiding, the one that hurt in ways the others didn't, the one that was still fresh, still raw. Aldrich's manuscript documented the persecution that had accompanied the plague, the accusations, the trials, the burnings. When disease struck and people couldn't understand why they needed someone to blame. Witches, Jews, foreigners, healers, anyone different, anyone vulnerable, anyone who could be sacrificed to give the illusion of control. Decunt Judaeos veneficasse puteos, cremant eos, sed pestis non cessat, igitur cremant plures. They say Jews poison the wells. They burn them. But the plague does not stop. Therefore, they burn more. The logic was circular, self-reinforcing. The disease continued. Therefore, the guilty had not all been found. Therefore, more needed to be punished. The failure of the solution was taken as evidence that the solution needed to be applied more aggressively. Nathaniel had seen it happen in real time during COVID. The division, the hatred, the absolute certainty on both sides that the other side was killing people. Anti-maskers versus maskers, anti-vax versus pro-vax, the shouting, the accusations, the death threats. Nathaniel had tried to stay neutral. He was a historian, not an epidemiologist. His job was to provide context, not conclusions, to show how humans had responded to plagues throughout history, to document patterns without prescribing solutions. It hadn't mattered. He'd written an article, published in a medical history journal with a readership of maybe 500 people, discussing how plague responses throughout history had been driven more by fear than by evidence, how societies had consistently sacrificed vulnerable populations when faced with disease they couldn't control, how scapegoating was a predictable response to uncertainty. Someone had found it, shared it on social media, stripped it of context, quoted selectively, made it sound like Nathaniel was saying COVID restrictions were based on fear rather than science. The response had been immediate and vicious. His email had exploded. Hundreds of messages, some agreeing, some disagreeing, most just angry. He was a tool of the anti-vax movement. He was a murderer. He was spreading dangerous misinformation. He should be fired. He should be arrested. He should die. Then someone had posted his home address. The first letter had arrived 3 days later. Handwritten. Detailed description of what the writer would do to Nathaniel if they ever met, how they'd kill him, how they'd make it hurt. The second letter had been worse. By the 5th, Nathaniel had stopped opening them, had taken them to the police, had been told there was nothing they could do unless someone actually showed up and actually did something. His colleague at Yale, Dr. Sarah Brennan, professor of epidemiology, had defended him publicly. Written a response saying Nathaniel was being misquoted, that his article was nuanced, that people needed to actually read it before condemning it. She'd received death threats too. Worse ones. Rape threats, threats against her children. Her teenage daughter had been doxxed. Sarah had taken a leave of absence, moved her family to her sister's house in Oregon, stopped publishing, stopped teaching, eventually stopped practicing medicine entirely. The last time Nathaniel had spoken to her, she'd sounded hollow. "I just wanted to help people understand," she said. "I thought if we could look at history, see the patterns, maybe avoid some mistakes. But they don't want understanding. They want someone to punish." She'd been right. The hatred had been equal on both sides. People who thought COVID was overblown blamed doctors for creating fear. People who thought COVID was serious blamed skeptics for spreading death. Both sides were certain. Both sides were righteous. Both sides sent death threats to anyone who suggested maybe the situation was complicated. Nathaniel wrote it all. The letters, the threats, Sarah's hollow voice, her daughter crying in the background. The absolute certainty on both sides that they were right and anyone who disagreed was evil. He wrote about how it mirrored medieval witch trials. Different accusations, same logic. Fear plus uncertainty plus human nature equals the need to find someone to blame. Someone to burn, someone whose suffering would make everything make sense. The plague hadn't stopped when they burned the witches. COVID hadn't stopped when they harassed the doctors. The disease was indifferent to human hatred. It spread or didn't based on biology, not morality. But humans needed someone to punish, needed to believe that suffering had meaning, that the bad things happening had a clear cause that could be eliminated if only you were righteous enough, angry enough, committed enough to rooting out evil. 700 years, same pattern, same certainty, same cruelty. By the time Nathaniel finished case study 7, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely type. The pain had gone beyond his scale. 15, 20, numbers that didn't mean anything because there was no reference point. He needed to stop, needed to rest, needed to take the OxyContin that sat in the bathroom cabinet. He took ibuprofen instead, lay on the couch, waited for the shaking to stop. It didn't stop. He got up, went back to the desk. One more case study before he could rest. One more mirror to polish. Case study 8, poison as medicine. This one should have been easier. It was clinical, historical, not personal like his mother or Sarah or Richard, except it was personal because of David, Nathaniel's brother, 10 years younger. The easygoing one, the one who made friends everywhere, who fixed things, who helped neighbors, who died at 52 with foam at his mouth. Aldrich had documented the medicines of his time with the same meticulous care he documented everything else. Mercury for skin diseases, arsenic for fevers, lead for various ailments. All of them poisons, all of them prescribed by physicians who believed absolutely that they were helping. Argentum vivum sanat morbos cutis, etiam occidit lente. Aegri sanantur, e morbo cutis, sed ametunt dentis, ametunt mentem. Quicksilver cures diseases of the skin. It also kills slowly. Patients are cured of skin disease, but lose teeth, lose mind. The medieval physicians had noticed, had documented, had continued prescribing anyway because the alternative was to admit they were poisoning people. Better to refine the dosage, adjust the protocol, find the perfect amount that cured without killing. That perfect amount had never been found. Because there was no perfect amount. Because mercury was poison, and poison didn't stop being poison just because a physician prescribed it. Modern medicine had been more sophisticated. Better chemistry, better understanding, better measurement. Same fundamental problem. OxyContin had been approved by the FDA in 1995, marketed as a safe, effective treatment for moderate to severe pain, less addictive than other opioids the manufacturer claimed. Extended release meant patients could take it less frequently. Perfect for chronic pain management. Doctors had prescribed it widely, trustingly, following the guidelines, following the science, following the marketing materials from a pharmaceutical company that had paid billions in bonuses to executives while millions of Americans became addicted. David had gotten his first prescription in 2008. Back surgery, herniated disc. The pain had been severe. The prescription had been standard. 30 pills, take as needed, follow up in 2 weeks. The pain had improved. The pills had made everything better. Not just the back, everything. Work stress, money worries, the grinding anxiety of middle age. All of it muted, manageable, gone. David had gotten a refill, then another. The doctor had been happy to prescribe. The patient was doing well. The treatment was working. No signs of abuse, no red flags. By the time anyone noticed, David was taking 20 pills a day. Buying from multiple doctors. Crushing and snorting when swallowing didn't work anymore. Spending rent money on pills. Losing jobs. Losing friends. Losing everything except the need for more. Nathaniel had tried to help. Had driven to David's apartment. Had found him unconscious on the bathroom floor, blue-lipped, barely breathing. Had called 911. Had watched the paramedics use Narcan. Had watched David wake up angry, confused, fighting. "I'm fine," David had said. "I just took a little too much. I'm fine." He hadn't been fine. Nathaniel had tried intervention, had gathered family, had begged David to go to rehab. David had gone, stayed 2 weeks, left early, relapsed within days. Tried again. Same result. And again. The last time Nathaniel saw his brother alive, David had looked ancient. 52 but looked 70. Hollow-eyed, shaking, desperate. "I can't stop," David had said. "I've tried, I can't. The pain comes back. Everything comes back. I can't do it, Nate." "You can. We'll get you help. Real help. No more. I'm tired. I'm so fucking tired." 2 days later, David had been dead. The autopsy had shown lethal levels of oxycodone. The police had found empty bottles. Prescriptions from 3 different doctors. All of them legal. All of them following protocol. David had died from medicine. From treatment that started legitimate and became addiction because no one had questioned whether prescribing opioids for chronic pain was fundamentally flawed. Whether some treatments, no matter how well regulated, were just poison with better marketing. Nathaniel wrote it all. The first prescription, the refills, the slow slide into addiction, the interventions that failed. David on the bathroom floor, blue and cold and empty. He wrote about how modern medicine had repeated the mercury mistake, had found a substance that worked in the short term, had ignored the long-term costs, had prescribed it widely, had defended it vigorously, had created an epidemic while insisting they were helping. Different poison, same pattern, same confidence, same body count. The sun was setting when Nathaniel finished case study 8. He'd been writing for 18 hours. His vision was blurring. The words on the screen looked like they were moving. The pain was everywhere now, not just his abdomen, his back, his chest, his bones, like his whole body was slowly dissolving from the inside. He saved the document. 168 pages. Part 2 complete. 4 more case studies. 4 more mirrors. 4 more examples of how humans learned nothing, changed nothing, repeated everything. He stood up. The room tilted. He grabbed the desk, waited for the world to stabilize. It didn't stabilize. He made it to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. The face that looked back was a stranger's. Hollow, gray, dying. He opened the medicine cabinet. The OxyContin bottle sat there, mocking him, offering him what it had offered David. Relief, peace, escape. He closed the cabinet without touching it, went to bed instead, lay in the dark, thought about David, about Sarah, about Richard, about his mother, about Catherine, about all the people who'd suffered in the name of healing, who'd been poisoned while being cured, who'd died from the very things meant to save them. Thought about Magister Aldrich, watching his patients die, documenting every failure, slowly realizing that he was the problem, that his treatments were worse than the disease, that centuries of tradition were built on a foundation of confident ignorance. Thought about his own book, 168 pages that proved humans hadn't changed, hadn't learned, would keep making the same mistakes in different forms until the species ended or evolved beyond the need for certainty. The pain climbed to levels that had no numbers, that had no names, that were just pain, pure, total, consuming. Nathaniel breathed through it, in, out, survival reduced to its simplest form. He thought about Marcus, about the clinical trial, about dying in a hospital hooked to machines that would keep him alive in the technical sense while he died in every way that mattered. He thought about Catherine, about David, about everyone who'd chosen treatment and gotten suffering instead. He thought about Aldrich, burned for telling the truth. He thought, I'm almost done. Just 4 more. Just 4 more mirrors, then I can rest. The pain didn't care about his plans. It climbed higher. It consumed everything. It was everything. Nathaniel endured it, because endurance was all that was left, because the book needed finishing, because someone needed to say it even if no one would listen, because 700 years ago a man had died trying to tell people to stop the bleeding, because that death shouldn't have been meaningless, because nothing should be meaningless even if most things were. He fell asleep sometime after midnight, dreamed of David, young, healthy, alive, before the back pain, before the prescription, before everything went wrong. Woke to November rain and the knowledge that he had 4 months left, maybe less. Enough time to finish part 3. Enough time to say the last things that needed saying. Enough time to hold up the final mirrors and show people what they couldn't see because they refused to look. The rain hammered against the windows. The house was cold. Nathaniel pulled the blanket tighter and thought about the work ahead. 4 more case studies. 4 more parallels, 4 more ways humans had destroyed themselves while trying to survive. He would document them all, not because it would matter, because someone had to bear witness, because the mirror had to be there even if everyone looked away, because that's what Aldrich had done, what Catherine had deserved, what David had needed, what his mother had earned, what Sarah had tried to do, what Richard had died without getting. Truth, unadorned, uncomfortable, ignored, but spoken anyway. Nathaniel closed his eyes, let the pain wash over him like waves, like weather, like something that happened to him but wasn't him. He would finish the book. Then he would die, in that order, on his own terms. That was the plan. The pain didn't care about plans, but Nathaniel had learned over 70 pages and 168 more that caring didn't determine outcomes. Action did, words did, documentation did. Whether anyone listened was irrelevant. The mirror just had to be there. He fell back asleep thinking about part 3, the final section. The end, not his end, the end of the documentation, the completion of the work. That was all that mattered now. The work, the witness, the mirror. Everything else was just pain, just time, just the slow mechanics of dying. He could endure that. He had endured worse. He would endure this too, until the work was done. November became December. Nathaniel marked the transition not by calendars but by the quality of light. The way afternoon sun slanted lower through the study window. The way shadows grew longer even at noon. The way the maple tree outside stood bare and black against white sky, its leaves long since fallen, its branches reaching upward like skeletal hands. He'd stopped leaving the house entirely. Groceries arrived on the doorstep. Instacart, a service Catherine had set up years ago that he'd never bothered to cancel. He ordered soup, bread, coffee, the essentials. Everything else felt optional. The pain had become his constant companion. No longer something that came and went, but something that simply was. Background radiation, the new normal. He'd stopped trying to rate it on a scale. Pain was just the condition of being alive now. He worked from bed most days, laptop propped on pillows, Aldrich's manuscript on the nightstand within reach. The work continued, had to continue. Because stopping meant thinking about what came next, and Nathaniel wasn't ready for that yet. 4 more case studies, 4 more mirrors to complete the set. He opened the laptop, started typing. Case study 9, Bodies Among the Living. Aldrich had written about this with particular horror. The way death had overwhelmed Winchester in the autumn of 1349. The way bodies had accumulated faster than they could be buried. The way the living had been forced to coexist with the dead because there was nowhere else to put them. Mortui indomibus iacent, invius iacent, nemo habet tempus sepulire omnes, putredo ubique est. The dead lie in houses. They lie in streets. No one has time to bury all. Rot is everywhere. Aldrich had documented how this had worsened the outbreak. Bodies decaying, fluids seeping, insects multiplying. The smell that permeated everything. The psychological toll of sleeping in rooms where corpses waited for burial that might not come for days. Vivere inter mortuos est vivere in inferno. To live among the dead is to live in hell. Nathaniel thought about COVID, March 2020, New York City. He'd watched the news. Everyone had. The refrigerated trucks outside hospitals, temporary morgues, Hard Island's mass graves, bodies stacked in funeral homes waiting for cremation. The infrastructure of death overwhelmed by the volume of dying. He'd thought then about medieval plague pits, about how modern technology hadn't solved the fundamental problem. When people died faster than society could process their deaths, the dead became a logistical problem, a storage issue, a matter of cubic feet and refrigeration capacity. One of his former students, Jennifer Park, now a resident at Bellevue, had emailed him in April 2020. She'd wanted to talk to someone who understood historical context, who could tell her this wasn't unprecedented, who could make it make sense. They'd talked on Zoom. Jennifer had looked exhausted, hollowed out, wearing scrubs that hung loose on a frame that had lost weight it couldn't afford to lose. "We're out of space," she'd said. "The morgue is full, the trucks are full. We're putting them in temporary storage, and even that's running out, and they keep coming, every day. More bodies than the day before, and we can't keep up." Her voice had broken then. "I signed up to save people, not to manage corpses, not to decide which body goes in which refrigerated truck, not to call families and tell them we don't know when they can have their loved one back for burial because we physically don't have room." Nathaniel had told her about the plague, about how medieval cities had faced the same impossible calculus, about how Jennifer wasn't failing. The system was failing. The situation was impossible. She was doing the best anyone could do. It hadn't helped. He'd known it wouldn't, but he'd said it anyway. Jennifer had quit medicine 6 months later. Last he'd heard, she was teaching high school biology in Vermont. Alive, functional, but fundamentally changed by having lived among the dead for too long. Nathaniel wrote it all. The refrigerated trucks, Jennifer's hollow eyes, the mass graves on Hard Island, prisoners from Rikers Island doing the burial work because there was no one else. The way modern infrastructure had collapsed into medieval patterns the moment death exceeded capacity. Different tools, same overwhelming, same horror, same realization that civilization was thinner than anyone wanted to believe. That it only took a few weeks of excessive dying for the modern world to look remarkably like the medieval one. Bodies, everywhere, waiting, while the living tried to continue living in proximity to decomposition and loss. He saved the file. 200 pages now. 3 more to go. The pain had shifted. Lower, deeper, different somehow. He ignored it, had become expert at ignoring it, had learned that paying attention to pain didn't reduce it, only made time pass slower. Outside snow had started to fall. First snow of December. Catherine had loved first snow. Would stand at the window with coffee, watching it fall, saying nothing. Just watching. Present in the moment in a way Nathaniel had never managed. He missed her. The missing hadn't dulled. Time didn't heal that particular wound. It just made you better at living with it. Like pain, like dying, like everything else that couldn't be fixed, only endured. He opened a new page, started case study 10, refusing isolation. This was the one that had puzzled Aldrich most. He'd observed that disease spread through contact, had documented it meticulously. One sick person, then their family, then their neighbors, then the whole street. The pattern was clear. Egri deberin separari, sed nemo volt eos relinquere, familia congregatur, amici visitant, sacerdos venit dare sacramenta, omnes inficiuntur. The sick should be separated, but no one wants to leave them. Family gathers, friends visit, priest comes to give sacraments, all become infected. Aldrich had tried to recommend isolation. Keep the sick away from the healthy, let them recover or die without spreading disease further. It made logical sense. It had been rejected as cruel, unchristian, immoral. Dicunt me esse sine misericordia, dicunt amorem Christianum requirere praesentiam, sed praesentia portat mortem. They say I am without mercy. They say Christian love requires presence, but presence carries death. Medieval people had chosen love over logic, chosen to sit with their dying rather than abandon them, chosen to hold hands and pray together and breathe the same air even when that air carried plague. They died for it, whole families, whole households. Love had killed them as thoroughly as any weapon. Nathaniel thought about Thanksgiving 2020. The CDC had recommended people not gather, stay home, celebrate separately. The virus was spreading, the hospitals were filling, gathering meant risk, meant transmission, meant more death. People had gathered anyway. Nathaniel had heard the arguments, seen them on social media, in op-eds, in angry emails from students and colleagues. I need to see my family. We can't live in fear forever. Life is for living, not for hiding. My grandmother is 90. This might be her last Thanksgiving. I'm not going to abandon her. The logic was emotional, human, understandable, also epidemiologically catastrophic. His colleague from Boston University, Thomas Wright, professor of sociology, had written about this, how humans were social creatures, how isolation violated fundamental psychological needs, how you couldn't ask people to choose between safety and connection because connection was a form of safety, a deeper safety than mere biology. Thomas had gone to Thanksgiving dinner with his extended family, 23 people, his parents' house in Connecticut. Traditional meal, traditional gathering. Everyone healthy, everyone careful, everyone sure it would be fine. Thomas's father had been the first to get sick. 72, diabetic, started with a cough, progressed to pneumonia, dead within 2 weeks. Then Thomas's mother, then his sister, then Thomas himself. Thomas had survived, barely. 3 weeks in ICU, 2 months of recovery, long COVID, that left him unable to work for a year. His mother survived too. His sister didn't. Nathaniel had received an email from Thomas in March 2021. Short, devastated. You were right about the patterns. We knew the risk. We chose connection anyway. And my sister is dead because of it. Because we couldn't bear to be apart. Because we thought love was more important than caution. Because we were human and humans make the same mistakes over and over and over. Nathaniel wrote it all. The Thanksgiving gathering. Thomas's father coughing. The sister who'd never leave the hospital. The choice between isolation and connection, that wasn't really a choice because humans weren't built for isolation. Medieval people gathering around deathbeds, modern families gathering for holidays, both choosing presence over safety, both dying for love, both making the deeply human decision to be together even when together meant risk. Different virus, same choice, same cost, same refusal to accept that sometimes love and survival were incompatible. That sometimes the kindest thing was distance. That sometimes saving lives meant abandoning the sick to die alone. No one wanted to believe that. Not in 1349, not in 2020, not ever, so they didn't believe it. They gathered, they held hands, they breathed together, they died together. And the epidemiologists and historians wrote about it afterward, documenting the pattern, knowing it would repeat because human nature didn't change, and love didn't stop being love just because it was epidemiologically unwise. Nathaniel saved the file, stood up. The room spun. He grabbed the desk, waited. The spinning didn't stop. He sat back down, carefully. Something was different, wrong. The pain had changed quality, sharp now, insistent, demanding attention. He checked his watch. 3 p.m. Wednesday, December 10th. He had 2 more case studies to write, 2 more mirrors to polish. Then the book would be done. Then he could rest. Then he could stop. Not yet. He opened a new page, started typing before the pain could get worse, before the spinning could win. Case study 11, chronic malnutrition. Aldrich had written about this differently than the acute crises. This wasn't about plague or bloodletting or sudden death. This was about the slow grind of never having quite enough. Plebs semper essuret, non acuta fames sed continua, panis est sed non satis, caro rara est, fructus et olera per tempora, corpus numquam plenum, semper deficit. The common people always hunger. Not acute hunger, but continuous. There is bread, but not enough. Meat is rare. Fruit and vegetables by seasons. The body never full, always lacking. Medieval peasants had lived in a state of perpetual nutritional deficit, not starving, not dying of hunger, just never quite having enough, never getting the vitamins, the proteins, the fats their bodies needed, growing shorter, weaker, more vulnerable to every other threat. Veri crescunt parvi, viri sunt debiles, morbi minoris occidunt quia corpus iam exhaustum est. Children grow small, men are weak. Minor diseases kill because the body is already exhausted. It was the background condition, the foundation on which every other crisis built. When plague came, it killed the malnourished first. When winter came, they died of cold because they had no reserves. When any stress appeared, their bodies had nothing left to give. Nathaniel thought about America, modern, wealthy, technologically advanced, with a population that was simultaneously overfed and malnourished. He'd researched this 5 years ago. Food deserts, areas where fresh food was unavailable or unaffordable, where the only options were fast food and convenience stores, where people ate constantly but consumed nothing their bodies could actually use. He'd visited Appalachia as part of a project on health disparities. Small towns in West Virginia and Kentucky, places where coal jobs had disappeared, where poverty had become generational, where life expectancy was dropping even as it rose everywhere else. He'd met families there, interviewed them, listened to their stories. One woman, Margaret Hollis, age 47, looked 60, had shown him her pantry. Boxes of pasta, cans of soup, crackers, cereal. Nothing fresh because fresh food spoiled and she couldn't afford to waste anything. Nothing nutritious because nutritious was expensive. I know it's not healthy, she'd said, but it's what I can afford, and it fills them up. 3 kids, all overweight, all malnourished, all growing up with bodies that would fail them young because they'd never gotten what they needed. Margaret herself had diabetes, high blood pressure, bad knees. At 47, she moved like an old woman, took 6 medications, couldn't work because her body had broken down from decades of malnutrition disguised as plenty. My kids won't live as long as I will, she'd said matter-of-factly. Their bodies are already failing. You can see it, and there's nothing I can do because this is what we can afford. Nathaniel wrote it all. the food deserts, Margaret's pantry, the children who were simultaneously obese and starving. The way modern capitalism had created the same condition as medieval feudalism, a population perpetually depleted, perpetually vulnerable, perpetually dying slowly from lack while surrounded by abundance they couldn't access. Different systems, same outcome. Bodies that never got what they needed. Lives shortened by the slow accumulation of deficits. Crisis waiting to happen because there were no reserves, no resilience, no capacity to handle any additional stress. Medieval peasants dying of plague because they were already weakened by hunger. Modern Americans dying of COVID because they were already weakened by obesity and diabetes and all the diseases of malnutrition in plenty. The mirror was clear, the pattern unchanged, the lesson unlearned. Nathaniel saved the file, 220 pages, one more case study, one more mirror, then done. The pain was screaming now, not metaphorically, actually screaming. A noise in his head that had no sound but was deafening anyway. He stood up again, made it 3 steps before his legs gave out. He caught himself on the desk, slid down to the floor, sat there breathing. In, out, in, out. The room was dark. When had it gotten dark? He'd started writing at 3. The clock on the wall said 9. 6 hours. Had he been writing for 6 hours, he needed to get up, needed to get to bed, needed to finish the last case study first. He pulled himself up, used the desk, the chair, everything within reach, made it back to the laptop. One more, just one more, he started typing. Case study 12, Endless War. Aldrich had written about war with the weary tone of someone who'd lived through too much of it. Winchester had changed hands multiple times during his lifetime. Sieges, occupations, raids. The constant background noise of armed men destroying what peasants built. Bellum numquam cessat, pax est tantum spatium inter bella. Milites veniunt, accipiunt frumentum, interficiunt pecus, comburunt agros, tum cabeunt, nos manemus morientes. War never ceases. Peace is only the space between wars. Soldiers come, they take grain, they kill livestock, they burn fields, then they leave. We remain dying. War hadn't been an event in medieval life. It had been a condition. Armies marching back and forth, destroying resources, spreading disease, making survival impossible even when the actual fighting was somewhere else. Bellum occidit plures fam et morbo quam gladio. War kills more by hunger and disease than by sword. The direct deaths were almost incidental. The real damage was infrastructure. Crops destroyed, tools stolen, livestock slaughtered. The foundation of survival stripped away, leaving populations vulnerable to everything else. Nathaniel thought about Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, all the wars America had fought in his lifetime, all the places where conflict had become permanent, where generations had grown up knowing nothing but war. He'd interviewed veterans, part of a project on military medicine in 2012, men and women who'd served multiple deployments, who'd seen things that changed them, who'd come home to a country that thanked them for their service and then forgot them. One man, Daniel Ortega, age 34, 3 tours in Iraq, had talked about the civilians. We'd secure an area, Daniel said, clear it of insurgents, set up infrastructure, schools, clinics, water treatment, try to help. Then we'd rotate out. New unit would come in, insurgents would come back, everything we'd built would get destroyed. And the people there, the families, they'd just endure it because what choice did they have? Daniel had paused, stared at nothing. There was this kid, maybe 8. He'd bring us tea sometimes. Just a kid being friendly. One day his house was hit by a mortar. Wrong place, wrong time. He lived. His mother didn't. His little sister didn't. And he just adapted, kept living, kept surviving, because that's what you do when war is just how life is. Daniel had come home with PTSD, depression, survivor's guilt, had tried to work, couldn't. Relationships failed, jobs failed. Eventually, everything failed. He'd shot himself in his apartment in 2015. The VA had sent a form letter of condolence. Nathaniel wrote it all, the endless deployments, the infrastructure built and destroyed and built again, the civilians trapped in permanent crisis, Daniel's suicide, the way war didn't end when soldiers came home because war was a condition, not an event. He wrote about how America spent trillions on weapons and warfare while its own citizens died of treatable diseases because healthcare was too expensive. How the choice between guns and medicine was the same choice medieval lords had made. How protecting the realm always mattered more than protecting the people in it. Different weapons, same priorities, same choice to spend resources on destruction rather than care. Same outcome, populations, weak and vulnerable, dying of things that could be prevented if anyone cared to prevent them. Medieval peasants watching soldiers burn their crops. Modern veterans watching politicians cut VA funding. Both sacrificed to priorities that place violence above health, conquest above care, power above people. Nathaniel's hands were barely working now. The letters on the screen blurred, doubled, merged. He kept typing, had to finish, had to complete the mirror, had to. The pain exploded, not gradually, not a climb, an explosion, everything white, everything gone, everything reduced to one word repeated endlessly in his mind: stop, 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 stop. He couldn't stop. Not yet. 2 more paragraphs, 1 more comparison, 1 more observation, then done, then complete. Then his hands wouldn't move. He stared at them. They looked like someone else's hands, thin, shaking, useless. He forced them to move. 1 letter, another, building words, building sentences. War is not an interruption of peace. War is the default state. Peace is the interruption. Medieval or modern in him, the pattern holds. Resources spent on violence, populations left to die. The choice made over and over: guns over butter, walls over wellness, victory over health. 1 more sentence, just 1 more. And the people endure, because humans are remarkably good at enduring, at surviving, at continuing even when everything is designed to make continuation impossible. He saved the file, 233 pages, 12 case studies, 12 mirrors, complete. Nathaniel closed the laptop, carefully. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. The book was done. Not published, not edited, not polished, but done. The documentation was complete. The patterns were identified. The mirrors were in place. Whether anyone would look was no longer his concern. His concern now was getting to bed. He stood. The room disappeared. Came back. Disappeared again. He was on the floor. When had that happened? He tried to stand. Couldn't. His body wasn't responding. Wasn't cooperating. Had decided independently that movement was no longer an option. The phone was on the desk, miles away. Impossible distance. He should call someone. Marcus. Dr. Reeves, 911. Someone. He didn't move toward the phone. Instead, he lay on the floor of his study, breathing, existing, watching the ceiling. This was it then. Not in a hospital, not hooked to machines, not fighting, not trying everything. Just here, on the floor. Work complete. Nothing left undone. Aldrich's manuscript sat on the desk above him. He couldn't see it, but knew it was there. 700 years between them. 700 years and nothing had changed. Humans still bled patients, still banned the wrong foods, still poisoned their water, still killed their cats, still gathered when they should isolate, still malnourished their children, still chose war over wellness, still died from confidence, from certainty, from the absolute conviction that this time, this approach, this paradigm was right, even when every piece of evidence said otherwise. Nathaniel almost laughed. Would have laughed if breathing wasn't taking all his energy. He'd written 233 pages proving that humans learn nothing. And he'd expected what? That his book would be different, that people would read it and suddenly understand that the pattern would break because he documented it. Hubris, his own. No different from medieval physicians or modern oncologists, or anyone who thought they'd figured out what everyone else had missed. The ceiling blurred, came back, blurred again. He thought about Catherine, about David, about his mother, about everyone who'd gone before, everyone who'd died from being treated, from being helped, from being saved. He thought, I chose better. I chose to die on my own terms. I finished the work. I didn't let them kill me with their cures. The thought was comforting, even if it was probably hubris too. The phone rang somewhere, far away, in another world where phones mattered, and answering them was something people did. It rang and stopped. Rang again, stopped again. Nathaniel closed his eyes. The pain was everywhere and nowhere. Had transcended pain and become something else. Something that didn't have a name. Something that just was. He thought about the last words he'd written. Humans are remarkably good at enduring. He was enduring now, enduring the end, the final documentation. The last observation. Dying was easier than they made it seem. You just stopped doing things, stopped moving, stopped eating, stopped fighting, stopped being afraid, stopped. And then you were done. The phone rang again. This time Nathaniel heard it differently. Recognized the ringtone. Marcus, his grandson, the one who'd wanted him to fight, to try, to not give up. Nathaniel hoped Marcus would understand eventually, would read the book, would see that giving up and choosing were different things, that sometimes stopping was the bravest option, that fighting wasn't always virtue, hoped but didn't expect. Understanding came late, if it came at all. The ringing stopped. Silence settled over the study. December silence. Snow falling outside, muffling everything, making the world soft and quiet and distant. Nathaniel let himself drift, not quite conscious, not quite unconscious, somewhere between, somewhere comfortable. He thought about Aldrich's last words in the manuscript, written the day before he was executed. Si qui hoc legunt et nihil faciunt, tam culpabilis sunt quam nos qui sanguinem mittimus, sed si unus homo audeat dicere non fortasse mundus mutabitur. If those who read this do nothing, they are as guilty as we who bled them. But if one person dares to say no, perhaps the world will change. Aldrich had said no, had been killed for it. The world hadn't changed. Nathaniel had said no, was dying for it. The world wouldn't change. But they'd both said it anyway. That mattered, somehow, in some way that didn't require outcome or success or vindication. The mirror had to be there even if no one looked. The truth had to be spoken even if no one listened. The documentation had to exist even if it changed nothing. That was enough. Had to be enough. Was enough. Nathaniel stopped thinking, stopped observing, stopped being Nathaniel. Became just breath, just pain, just existence. Just the simple fact of still being alive in this moment. Then not even that, just stillness, just quiet, just done. The snow kept falling outside. The clock kept ticking on the wall. The laptop sat on the desk with 233 pages saved in a file called The Medieval Mirror, Final Draft. The house settled into silence. The work was complete. The witness was over. The mirror stood polished and perfect, waiting for someone to look. Whether anyone would was no longer Nathaniel's concern. His concern was over. His watch was over. His documentation was complete. The phone rang one more time. Rang and rang into empty house, an empty room, an empty space where a person had been. Then even that stopped, and there was only silence, and snow, and 233 pages, waiting. Marcus found him 3 days later. The police report would say natural causes, pancreatic cancer, expected. The body had been transported to the morgue. The house had been sealed, standard procedure. Marcus had gone through the house slowly, touching things, remembering, finding his grandfather everywhere, in the coffee mug by the sink, in the books stacked on every surface, in the reading glasses on the nightstand, in the laptop on the study desk. Marcus had opened it, not snooping, just wanting to feel close to something Nathaniel had touched recently, wanting connection to the man who'd chosen dying over fighting, and Marcus still didn't understand why. The file had been there, impossible to miss. The Medieval Mirror, Final Draft. Marcus had read it, all of it, all 233 pages, had read it twice, then a third time, had cried, had understood, had seen his grandfather not as someone who'd given up, but as someone who'd chosen, who'd looked at the pattern, medieval to modern bloodletting, to chemotherapy, confidence, to certainty, to death, and had said no, not me, not that way. Marcus had called a publisher. A small academic press that specialized in medical history had sent them the manuscript, had written a preface explaining who Nathaniel was, what he'd chosen, why it mattered. The book had been published 6 months later. It had sold modestly, a few thousand copies, mostly to medical students, historians, people who thought about patterns, people who asked uncomfortable questions. One review in a medical journal had called it a devastating critique of medical hubris across 7 centuries. Required reading for anyone who believes modern medicine has learned from history's mistakes. Another review had called it dangerous anti-medical nihilism that could discourage patients from seeking treatment. Both were probably right. The book sat on shelves now, in libraries, in medical school bookstores, in the offices of doctors who thought about things beyond protocols. Most people never read it. Some did. Of those who read it, most dismissed it. Some didn't. Of those who didn't dismiss it, most forgot it. Some didn't. And maybe possibly occasionally one of those people who read it and didn't dismiss it and didn't forget it would pause before prescribing, would question before treating, would ask, is this healing or is this just what we've always done? Maybe they'd remember a 67-year-old historian who'd chosen to die quietly rather than be treated to death. Maybe they'd remember Magister Aldrich Byrne for telling people to stop the bleeding. Maybe they'd look in the mirror the book held up and recognize themselves. Maybe. Probably not. But maybe, and Nathaniel had known it would probably be not. Had written the book anyway, had polished the mirror anyway, had said no anyway, because someone had to, because the pattern wouldn't break if no one documented it, because truth mattered even when it changed nothing. Marcus kept a copy of the book on his desk at the hospital where he now practiced. Emergency medicine. New York. He was a good doctor, questioned things, didn't follow protocols blindly. Remembered that patients were people, not problems. Sometimes students asked about the book. Marcus would tell them about his grandfather, about the choice he'd made, about the 233 pages that said, look, see, question. Most students nodded politely and forgot. Some didn't. And the mirror stayed polished, waiting for the next person brave enough to look, for the next person willing to say, what if we're wrong, for the next person who understood that 700 years of mistakes proved not that humans were stupid, but that humans were trapped. Trapped in paradigms, trapped in certainty, trapped in the absolute conviction that this time, this approach, this treatment was different. The mirror waited, the snow fell, the pattern continued. But the book existed, and that Nathaniel had believed was enough, had to be enough, was enough. The mirror doesn't cure, it only shows. Whether anyone looks is their choice, but the mirror has to be there. Someone has to hold it up. Someone has to say, look, see what we've always done. See what we keep doing. Nathaniel had held up the mirror. Now it stood alone, polished, clear, perfect, waiting for the next person brave enough to recognize themselves in the reflection, waiting for the next person willing to say no. The wait would be long. It always was. But the mirror would be there. That was all it could do. All anyone could do. Hold up the mirror and hope someone eventually had the courage to look.